Hello again, Steve here. I was just out on a drive, 2,000 kilometer drive in one direction, that is, for a few days. And I stopped beside the highway here before it gets dark, say hello, take a break. I was actually, as I was driving along, I brought with me a audiobook rather, to listen to. And it's about, I forget what it's called, just in case you want to listen to it. It's called, nope, wrong one. It's Scientology anyway, it'll give you the name of it. Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman. Really fascinating. Listen, to see how gullible we human beings can be. It's absolutely astounding how people fall for this. But there's one thing I noticed. Oh yeah, because it's really interesting, just the absolute patent nonsense that was put forth by this guy, L. Ron Hubbard, this charismatic guy. Just absolute gibberish. But people take it as truth. Not only truth, but there's actually doctrine within the religion that eventually developed, Scientology, that he was, what do they call it? It's absolute truth. It's like gospel, or certainly unquestionable truth. And infallible, that he was infallible, and he's basically made into like a deity. In fact, when he died, they called him Source, that still he was their ruler and was there forever. It's just another example of a living God, right? But the stuff that he came up with, like, he had this nonsensical idea of how there was this creation myth about how there was these thetans floating around, and I guess thetan is like a soul floating around in the ether, and there was some volcano happened, and like some I don't remember it all, but it's absolutely hilarious. But no more outrageous than a lot of other creation myths, I suppose. He was very creative, and it's just astounding that somebody could make, and the guy made like, I don't know, $400 million or something his net worth was when he died. I mean, he sold bullshit for a living, right? I mean, it's just astounding how he's able to do that. But one interesting thing I noticed, though, is that how he used children he programmed children in a way. Like, later on when he had his Sea Org, when he was Commodore, when he was Commodore of this Sea Fleet, because he was an incredibly paranoid guy. He was always, he figured the people were chasing him all the time, so he wasn't safe on any land, so he had to get a fleet of ships and be offshore. And all of his caretakers were these young girls, 12-year-old, 11-year-old, whatever. He had a whole flock of them. And they would, carry his cigarette packages around and his ashtray and everything else. And the whole organization that took over, this guy, David Miscavige, I think his name was, he was like 20 years old or 18, like in his late teens, early 20s, when he was basically running the thing because, L. Ron Hubbard was so ill or whatever. When he passed away, this guy was still only in his early 20s, but he'd been like a kid in the organization and was reared as one of these close confidants to L. Ron Hubbard. And not only that, the way L. Ron Hubbard ran it was that he had the children to rat out their parents. Like, these children who were close to him, they couldn't be disciplined by anybody other than him. So, and he was basically there. They almost called them, like, they almost saw him as their father. Where have we seen that before, right? But I think it's interesting because a lot of organizations do this, or controlling organizations that are just built on bullshit. They have to try to convince the kids, otherwise this won't live, right? Like, for example, Hitler had the Hitler Youth. He knew, just like L. Ron Hubbard knew, he had to get into the minds of the kids, I guess. Whether he knew it or it was intuitive, I don't know. But the reality is that they get into the mind of the kids and they're able to take this forward because they become indoctrinated. Because they're like more of a blank slate, right? They're not as skeptical. And so Hitler had the Hitler Youth. I think of also the Jesuits, how they, the Jesuit I think it was Ignatius Loyola said, you give me a child till 7, I'll give you a man. Because you can indoctrinate the kid. And also the whole schooling system. The schooling system was set up, the modern one was set up by the Prussians because they needed a lot of people to fight as soldiers and also to work as factory workers and stuff like that in the early Industrial Revolution. So in order to craft people into a mold of what they want, they had to get them during those developing years, children. And we see it now with the whole status mentality that people have is, kids, most of their, so many of their formative years are spent in indoctrination camps we call schools. And it's promoted over and over again to get them in there younger and younger and younger. It wasn't long ago, it was just, when I first remember school, way back in the early 70s, late 60s, people would start in what they called grade 1. Then they had kindergarten, right? Then they brought in preschool, and it's pretty much universal now. All kids go to preschool 4. Now they're going to preschool 3. And, I don't know how long, if it's going to be 2 pretty soon, and then preschool and so on. So no child left behind, right? So how does this improve the quality of our lives? Well, by looking at this and realizing how our tendency to fall for bullshit, number one, I think comes from the nonsensical programs that have been put on us. So, because I've noticed that when people have all kinds of nonsensical notions, if they realize they're nonsensical, the tendency is to jump on to another form of BS. They'll go from Catholic to New Age or something like that. I think it's because we don't get to the point of enough self-knowledge to realize that we don't really need it all. You don't need any of that stuff if it doesn't make any sense. Now, the other thing too is to realize this tendency and to realize that we're all programmed to some extent, either a lesser or greater degree. We realize when a lot of this happened in our younger years, we can realize how deep it is. Just how deep it is, right? So kind of accepting that and then being able to work through it with a certain amount of rigor, like a philosophical rigor of questioning, right? Is this true? Is this true? Is this true? If for some reason one of us was a Scientologist devotee for many years, and we started to think about it, we'd say, well, this guy L. Ron Hubbard and everybody else around me thinks he's a deity or whatever, and he's more special than me. Is that true? Is that true? Who's saying that? What is the basis upon which they're saying it? He takes a piss every day and eats and so on too. Why is he any better than me? Right? So we start questioning these things, and we finally get to the point we realize we're all human beings. And people can say all kinds of crap that they want. They can say they're better than us and so on, but what's their evidence? Just saying something is not the evidence. But yet we're riding on a lot of those programs. And those programs are very deep because a lot of them were the basis of them were there from early ages. And we can see the evidence of this over and over again because of these hucksters who have done, I think, so much harm in the short term, but in the long term, maybe it's helping us to wake up. Guys like L. Ron Hubbard and Hitler and Jesuits and all these sorts of people who are converting people into what they never chose to be. But yet, it's happened, and it is happening, and parents are doing the same thing. We all do it, to a greater or lesser extent. And the point is to learn from it in our own experience. That yes, we went through that. It's deep down. It's just going to give me more cause to be aware and question. Eventually, that stuff will percolate out. We'll replace it with a more rigorous way of just being open and honest, accepting what we've been through, and realize we've been told a whole lot of crap, which is mostly abstractions, other people's delusions, not even beliefs, actually. They're not even beliefs, they're delusions. And, listening to this book, you have a chance to read it. If you want an example of an incredibly fucking deluded man that L. Ron Hubbard was, I mean, just a pathetic, actually sad how deluded this man was. But he was so deluded that it seemed like he even believed it, right? But he just making shit up. He was a science fiction writer. But what he was a kind of a science fiction writer who actually it seemed like he believed he would become involved in his fiction. So much so that he actually created a world within of that fiction, with thousands of people involved and hundreds of millions of dollars. And guys who are otherwise considered to be respectable, like Tom Cruise, buy into this crap. It's astounding. But it goes to show just how powerful childhood programming can be to mess us up for a long time. But when we wake up to it, we can realize, I'm going to question this, I'm going to question this, I'm going to question this. Even though this stuff keeps coming up and telling me this is true. Somebody told me this, therefore, over and over again when I was subconscious. And it appears as though I believe it. Is it true? What is the basis upon me saying it's true? Well, if answers start coming up like, well, my mom told me or my dad told me. Well, that's not really an answer. It's in terms of evidence. Because what was their foundation? And so on. We start digging down, we realize that a lot of what we're taught is just nonsense. And we can learn a lot more just from what we see, what we hear, what we touch, how we interact, and how we reason through things as to what is the truth, I think. But just my comments. Hopefully that helps. I'm going to get going here again on the road. Got a few hours to drive. And I want to take some pictures in the mountain. I'm going to be in the mountains tomorrow, actually. And hopefully I can get some good shots for you. Okay? Talk to you later.